Hello everyone, welcome to Chapter 4, Cultural Patterns. Since this is the first section of this chapter, let's make clear what the learning objectives are. In this chapter, students will learn how to understand the definition of cultural patterns, describe the components of cultural patterns, summarize the theory about cultural patterns, and evaluate the importance of cultural patterns. In today's lesson, I tend to help you to build a good intercultural communication habits and skills. Very importantly, you will be familiarized with the basic concepts of intercultural communication. Let's begin with a common issue you may encounter when you first get to your college town. You often compare the regional food and climate of your hometown with your college town. First, what do local people commonly eat for breakfast, lunch, or dinner? Are there any specialty foods which can only be found in your hometown region? This may tell us the relation between food and geography, which is an inevitable part of culture. Of course, this is very abstract and naive to say that a person can learn more than superficial and pop culture knowledge about another culture by simply talking to someone else or watching movies from a different culture. To understand how to use language globally, first let's discuss the meaning of culture. Let's see an interesting case. Wang Bin, a Chinese student studying in Britain, was once invited by her British classmates, Britain, to his house to cook a Chinese meal. Her two Chinese friends were also invited. They busied themselves in the kitchen, making dumplings while Britain did something in the garden, and his wife sat on the sofa reading. Wang Bin felt a little upset, for she thought that both the host and the hostess should offer to help with the kitchen work. The meal was great and everyone enjoyed themselves. The couple kept complimenting them on the cooking skill and asked for the recipe. But then, after the meal, the couple just put down their chopsticks and started minding their own business, leaving the Chinese guests to clear the table and do the dishes. Wang Bin felt absolutely confused, for even angry. She concluded that the guests to Chinese family will never be allowed to do any housework. This is one of the ways the host and hostess show their hospitality. Even if the guests offer to cook a dish, the host or the hostess should stay around them and offer help whenever can. It is even harder to imagine that they would let them guests clear the table and do the dishes, though the guests should always volunteer to help. Wang Bin's meal at the Britain family sets a great contrast to her Chinese experience. This is why Wang Bin got angry. What she should do is to avoid a hasty conclusion. She should first observe the situation without judgment, and then analyze the situation using what she knows about the differences between Chinese and British culture. In terms of culture, we tend to make it clear that the simplest definition of culture is a set of values and norms within a group of society and institutional learned behavior. Culture is also how a person identifies himself as. So there is also an individual component to culture that must be understood as age, gender, class, and any other group identities or affiliation. We focus on how to define cultural patterns First, an obvious cultural difference lies in the food people eat and the tableware they use every day. We identify hamburger with the US, while we identify chopsticks with China. Second, another obvious difference between cultures is the clothing people wear. We often see men from Middle Eastern cultures with long robes and hairdresses. Cultural patterns are the basis for interpreting the symbols used in communication. In a word, culture is a microscopic integration, so learners are required to realize the existence of cultural norm, which refers to a unique cultural rule that people living in a nation or society have long adapted to and adhere to. This is an entire cultural system of value orientation, behavior pattern, and psychological tendency. Before coming to learn cultural patterns, let's have a group discussion on the following questions. In the future, will you share your home with your family members, such as your parents or grandparents? In the future, if young people will prefer to live in their own home with only their nuclear family, such as husband, wife, and children, how will this new custom change society? Will children spend time with their grandparents? Will families begin to live far away from one another, such as the grandparents living in Guangzhou while the parents and children living in Beijing? Questions for assignment. How does a climate of your hometown region influence the kinds of food that local people eat?